follow your passion. Have you guys heard this? Someone said this to you, follow your passion. It's one of those things that I think is just flown around, follow your passion, follow your dreams, follow your heart's desire. But gosh, this advice is really tricky. This advice is super tricky. I don't know if you've been given this advice and then you've been scratching your head, or maybe even wondering the years going, what is my passion? What am I supposed to do here? Let's talk about this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies, your whole being, body, mind, spirit, soul, physical body, your brain, offer it everything as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Give all of yourself to him. Do not conform. Don't do something. What? Don't conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed. Transformed, not just changed, but completely metamorphosized. Transformed by what? The renewal of the mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. And well, gosh, we're going to talk about this. I can't wait. Approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. You'll notice almost immediately how this contrasts follow your passion. Because I think follow your passion kind of has this feel to it, doesn't it? Kind of like, I've got to go and find what I'm passionate about. I'm going to go find it. And so some people go on an adventure. I'm gonna go explore. If I find enough things in the world, maybe there's something here. A lot of people might then go on maybe a career adventure, trying different jobs, looking for different things, trying to find what they're passionate about. People sometimes even do a university or a TAFE degree to look for passion. It's one of those things. If I just find it, man, that's just going to give me purpose. It's going to give me direction. It's going to give me work. It sounds really good, but it's got its problems, because when faced with the gospel, it gets really confusing, because we know that the gospel is follow Jesus. Follow Jesus. We know that's the gospel. And so then how do you reconcile follow Jesus and then follow your passion? And so then we start to get into this crazy journey. We're like, okay, I'm going to follow my passion, and then I'm just going to include Jesus on the journey somehow, and then figure it as I go. Or it's, okay, I'm going to abandon my passion. I'm just going to follow Jesus, and then I'm just going to be deprived and live a life of misery and just, carry my cross. And that doesn't sound like it's it. So as Christians, it's confusing. The world just goes, yeah, follow your passion and just go for it. Whereas us, we just kind of a little bit restrained because we're supposed to follow Jesus. So how do you reconcile these two things together? How do you reconcile follow your passion and then the ultimate goal of Christianity or following Jesus, which is this? And I've just put it in the wrong place, but not my will, but your will be done. I mean, these two things couldn't be more in contrast. Follow your passion and not my will, but your will. So how do I live with these two? We want to be that follower of Jesus that can follow him to the Garden of Gethsemane and then surrender his very will before the Father and saying, I want what you want. And then there's the world that says, you know what? Inside of you, you know what you want. You know what you're made for. So go and find it. And I wonder how this journey is going. How do we reconcile it? I think rather than just doing simply trial and error for the rest of our lives and using our life as an experiment, I wonder if we can just turn to the Bible for some truth. I'm going to just turn to an illustration. Imagine you are standing at a cafe during your lunch break and you're waiting for a colleague to come so you can have some lunch together, or maybe grab a coffee together. You can imagine this right now. It's hard to imagine because we're in lockdown, but imagine if this was possible and you're waiting at a cafe for a friend, and then some stranger rocks up to you and says, hey, excuse me, may I use your phone? What's your immediate response? I think my immediate response would be immediately inside my mind and my heart, immediately, probably even my face, because I have difficulty hiding my emotions. I'd be like, no, no. What? I would try to tweak all these muscles, and I'd be like, sorry, I don't know. That would be just all fake. But inside my heart, I'd be like, yeah, no, it's not happening. And I would find every reason why I would decline this person to make this person go away. No, sorry, I don't know who you are. I'm not comfortable. Sorry, we're still in the pandemic and I don't want your germs. I don't know. Have you sanitized your hands? Like I would find every reason to say no. So this person is asking, and I would say no. Now, tweak it. You're standing at the cafe, you're waiting for a colleague, and then suddenly your friend rocks up. And she's like, whoa, where did you come from? And your friend's like, look, I can't explain right now, but can I use your phone? Immediately, what's your response? I wonder if it's a close enough friend, you'd go, yeah, sure. You would unlock your phone, hand them the phone, and give them free reign. Strange. Same request, different person elicits, brings out a different response. Notice this? Same request. The stranger asks, can I use your phone? We go, no. Same request. Friend asks for the phone. We go, yeah, sure. Same request, different response. Why? Our response differs depending on our relationship. Our response differs depending on our relationship. What I make happen differs depending on who it is that's asking me. Requests are relational. And this is striking. This is striking. Why? Because you turn to this passage again and look at this for a moment. Offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Then it's all consequential. Yeah. It's all based on what's happening before it. Therefore, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is. For every Christian, one of the primary goals in life is to know the will of God. Have we not said this so many times in our Christian walk? I want to know your will. Or if we're faced with a decision, is this God's will? How elusive, how desirable, how wonderful it is to know the will of God. But let me say this to you. How can you know his will if you do not know him? It's God's will. It's not just this objective God's will that we look to search out. It's his will. In order to know God's will, we actually need to know God. I wonder if God's like the one with the phone and he's saying, I want to give this to you, but I don't know who you are. His will is intrinsic, it's tied to his relationship with you. There's things he wants to do with you. There's things he wants to release in your life. There's things he wants to point you into, but he can't without relationship. The Bible is no textbook for figuring out how to do life. Simply, the Bible is a love letter that points to God to connect us to him so that we can then, in moments by moment, discern what his will is because we know who he is. I don't know if you've ever struggled with this passage, but I've struggled with this passage. Jesus in John 15:5 says, apart from me, you can do nothing. And I think sometimes I think to myself, no, I feel like I could do quite a lot. Like, there's lots that I could probably do without you, Jesus. And it feels like there's lots of people in the world who are doing lots of great things, but They don't have any relationship with you. But if we as Christians, if we as followers of Jesus, if our goal is to know God's will, and the only way, what Jesus is saying, the only way we can know his will is if we know Jesus. The only way we can know God is through God himself, who is Jesus. Philip asked Jesus just before this, hey, show us the Father, and that's enough for us. And Jesus goes back to Philip and says, hey, if you know me, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So when we see Jesus, when we're with Jesus, we've seen God. And when we're with God, then we can know his will. There's an order to this. There's a relationship to this. And so when Jesus says, apart from me, you can do nothing, consider this for a moment. The only thing that will count in this world, in this age, in this time, will be what we have done with Jesus. Everything else will perish. There will be a new heavens and new earth when Jesus returns. All things will perish except for those things that are according to God's will. So if only what is done in God's will counts, nothing else counts. Only what is God's will. And so then how do we live this life? We must live it abiding in Jesus. Because it's only in Jesus where we do anything that counts. And none of us want to do things that don't count. We want to live lives that count. We want our lives to count. How do we do that? It comes with relationship with Jesus. There's a story about this young boy, and he has 11 older brothers, and this young boy, he's really, really loved, kind of like the youngest son. Some of you guys are youngest sons, and you're like you're dearly, dearly loved. He was much loved by his father, but his brothers hated him, all 11 of them. Because at an early age, he had all these dreams, and I don't know. He was very, very, I don't know if maybe he did the right thing, the wrong thing. We don't know. But his brothers didn't respond very well to his dreams because it all sounded like he was always going to become greater than all of them. And then their brothers would have to bow down to him and all sorts of other nonsense. And so they hated on him. They hated on him to the point where one day they decided, let's get this guy out of our life. This was his 11 older brothers. And so even though they knew his father really, really loved him, they didn't quite kill him. They just sold him off as a slave. And so he was a slave, and then he ended up being sold to Potiphar, an Egyptian ruler. By now, you know who this person is. His name is Joseph. And when he was sold into Potiphar's house just as a slave, he was just a common slave. He's not an Egyptian. He's just a common foreigner, nobody. No name, no ethnicity, no title, no nothing. No positions, no power, no possessions, nothing. Sold as a nobody. And yet, when you think about Joseph's life, he's just an absolute nobody for a stage of his life. And at the end, when we read about Joseph, he's second in charge of the entire nation of Egypt, second in charge to Potiphar, second in charge to this entire region, second in charge. And then for us, we think, wow, he hit God's will. He hit the jackpot. He hit the jackpot. And we think to ourselves, wow, I want to hit the jackpot. I want to be second in charge to a great kingdom. I want to be a leader in an organization. I want to have influence. I want to hit that jackpot. And then so we go, okay, then let's study Joseph and let's study his life. What did he do to get there? And if you read the story of Joseph, you'll notice that the only reason that he got there was not because of any certain pattern, but it's because, and it's written like this, that the favor of God was on him. And then the flip side, what it doesn't say, but what we can read into is that Joseph abided. He stayed in that favor. Whether he was in prison falsely or whether he's in Potiphar's house, he stayed in that favor. He didn't want to get away from that favor. Remember how when he was in prison, he was falsely imprisoned and he shouldn't have been there. He should have acted out, but he didn't. He stayed in God's favor and he ended up becoming the chief prisoner, kind of taking care of the rest of the prisoners. Actually, the guards loved him because they knew if they could just put Joseph in charge, he was so trustworthy. How was Joseph so trustworthy in prison when he was wrongly imprisoned? He remained in God's favor. He remained knowing that I had these dreams. They're from God. It's going to be a matter of time. And then when he finally got back into Potiphar's house, what happened? Actually, this was before this situation when he was falsely imprisoned. Before this situation, he was in Potiphar's house. He was doing very successfully. Everything was going extremely well. Nothing to do with dreams, just doing really, really well. And then Potiphar's wife started to hit on him. And here's a young man. He's probably handsome, you know. And Potiphar's wife hit on him. She didn't hit on him once. It was almost daily. Just would not stop relenting. And then one day, he just, the only way to escape her absolute tenacity against him was for him to run away. He made the mistake of leaving the clothes there. But notice what he said. He says, I would not want to sin against who? I don't want to sin against God. I can't do this to God. It wasn't about adultery. It wasn't about committing sin. It wasn't about Potiphar. It had nothing to do with even the woman who was trying to, I don't want you to commit adultery. That's why I'm not going to do this. Nothing to do with her, nothing to do with Potiphar, nothing to do with even himself. What he had was, I don't want to get out of this favor with God. I don't want to sin against God. The only reason why I'm here is God. I don't want to do this against God. Do you understand this? And that's why when he was falsely imprisoned moments later, he still goes, I want to stay in favor with God. I want to stay here. And then the story unfolds, and then he becomes, through his dreams and interpretation of his dreams, and then the word that God gave to him at the start gets fulfilled. How? It doesn't get fulfilled because he's so tenacious. It doesn't get fulfilled because he's so diligent. He gets fulfilled because he stayed in the favor with God. He stayed with God. I think even as Christians, we all want to be successful, whatever that means. But you know what? Whatever that means, we should strive for it. Sounds good. How do we get there? For us, it's different. We get to success by abiding in his favor, by staying with Jesus. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and everything will get added to you. We stay on that lane. That's a narrow and hard road. It's a narrow gate and a hard road to follow, but we just stay on that, abiding and abiding and abiding. Follow your passions. Yeah, that's fine. But you know what? As for me, I'm going to follow a person. His name's Jesus. I'm going to follow him. I'm going to stay in his favor. Stay in his favor. Everything else will come, or everything else gets gone. Doesn't matter. I'm going to stay in his favor. Peter and the disciples, they wait for the Holy Spirit. They receive power from on high. They start preaching. Thousands of people are getting saved. And then they find this lame person sitting there, and Peter goes, silver or gold I do not have, but in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, get up and walk. And immediately gets up and walk. Everyone knows this lame person's been there for so long. And so this is a huge commotion in Jerusalem, huge commotion. And so, of course, the Pharisees are alerted of this, and the Pharisees then approach Peter and say, just stop this business. And then Peter starts preaching, just gives him a strong word. And then verse 13, this is what the observation is about the Pharisees. Now, when the Pharisees, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were educated, common men. Notice this language. It's not about the fact they were educated. It's not about the fact that they were powerful. They were educated and common men. But what made them different? What really mattered? What do we want to be counted for? And they recognized they had been with Jesus. What's success to you? I reckon, as for me, I don't want to be perceived that I'm educated. I don't want to be perceived that I'm an extraordinary man. As for me, I wonder if success for me is I want to be recognized that I've been with Jesus. I want to be known for that. So much of the world is telling us, hey, wouldn't it be so great if you just perceived? And you know what, take it from me, for someone who looks like a 23-year-old, every time I step into the office or meet anyone new in the corporate environment, they treat me like a graduate. It's so, I mean, thank God, I just love every strand of silver, amazing hair I have. Just the Lord just continue to give me as much silver hair as possible, because at least that kind of makes them question their unconscious bias against me. And so, yeah, I mean, I so want to be perceived as old and wise and knowledgeable. I mean, that's just my heart's desire, to step into a boardroom, sit with people and go, this person looks educated and he's not a common man. He looks like an uncommon, amazing individual. I want to be perceived that way. But you know what? The world wants me to be perceived that way. What the Lord wants for me, what the Lord has for me, is that I might be able to meet you, that I might be able to present myself before my wife and my children, that I might be able to present myself to my neighbor or to the people I work with or the strangers I meet at a cafe or my barista, that I might be able to meet with them and that they might perceive or recognize that there's something about me. And for those that know I'm a Christian, that I have been and I've spent time with Jesus. That's how I want to be known. And I wonder if that's what we want to be known for as Christians. That's success. How do we get there? We need to spend time with him. How do you know the will of God? The will of God comes by knowing God. It's not some sort of will of God that... The will of God comes with God. And so this is what I'm not saying. And this is where you cannot go with your mind. So I need to spend more time in the church. I'm not saying this. Whether it's a church building or a construction site, it doesn't matter. Remember Peter and John, they were just common people. I'm not saying every single one of us need to become pastors and missionaries and so that we can be recognized we've been with Jesus. You're getting the wrong point. That means people are perceiving you as being with Jesus. They're just making that unconscious bias. Oh, this person's a pastor, therefore he must have been with Jesus. That's not even true. Maybe not. It's just perception. I want to be recognized that I've been with Jesus, whether or not I'm a pastor or a missionary. This is not the goal. So I'm not saying we all need to start working for the church in order to be recognized as being with Jesus. I want to be recognized even on a construction site that I'm being with Jesus. I don't want to just be recognized at church that I've been with Jesus. I don't mean recognized just when I pray that I've been with Jesus. I want to be recognized when I'm meeting people on a construction site as a tradie. Something different about you. How do you know this stuff? How do you think like that? Maybe because this individual spends time with Jesus. It's not about more time in the church. It's not about getting a job in the church. It's not about doing ministry. It's about spending time with Jesus. In order to know God's will, you need to know God. We cannot disconnect God's will and God. You want to know more of God's will for your life? Well, you actually have to know more of God. When you start to get to know more of God, God's will will become more and more obvious to you. It'll become so much more apparent to you. Like any good friend, the more time you spend with that friend, the more you know what they want. The more you know what they know is good. The more you know what they sound like, especially for those that live with people, don't you have your mom's voice playing in the back of your head when you do certain things? You know her will. You know where things should go. You know how things should be. For many husbands, I'm going to speak for myself. I know the will of my wife. I know where before she came, she went shopping in the morning and the house was a mess. I know exactly what was going to proceed out of her mouth the moment she opened the door. What a mess. And then, all three of us would have had to frantically scramble to make sure that thing was right. I was like, I'm going to save myself the scramble and I'm going to present the house so that she doesn't have to say that. How do I know the will of my wife? Well, I've just spent enough time with her. Many of you would not know the will of my wife. You can never expect to know her will that well. Nor can you even dare to ask to know what her will is. Nor does she have any need to tell you her will unless you have that kind of relationship with her. What is the Lord asking for you and I as followers? He's saying, let's be together. For us to know his good, pleasing, and perfect will, how wonderful his will is, because we know we want that. That's what counts. That's what's good. That's what leads to life. That's where everything else gets added. How do we know that? We've got to get to know him. So follow your passion. I reckon it's half right. I'm going to give this 5 out of 10. I reckon it's half right because it's only halfway there. As for us, as for followers of Jesus, our passion is Jesus. Follow your passion. And as for my brothers and sisters in the faith, in Christ, our passion, his name is Jesus.